Well, now that we've seen a simple form work, it's time for us to go back and try out some additional elements that we can use inside of forms. So let me go ahead and close up this page, and we'll open up the tryout form elements HTML file. I'll double click to open it up in the browser first, and of course, I'm going to drag it over to my text application icon so we can take a look at the code. Now, as you can see, I've got places where we're going to be gathering much more information. And I'd like to use some of the other elements besides just text fields. But some things we just need to type text in for, like for instance, our name and our email. So let's go back to our document and we'll set up our basic form and add the text fields for those. For starters, I can see that all my text is just separated by line breaks. So I'll go up to the very top of it and we'll start out our form tag. We're going to need an action attribute just like before. And I'll set that to our mail to for our email, and that way we can test it just like the last form. We need a method, and since we're using email again, that's going to be post just like before. And I'll go ahead and give my form a name. I'll call it survey. We'll finish off our form tag, and we want to include all the elements, so I'm going to go down here to the bottom of the page, underneath the comments and before the body, and we'll add in our close form tag. Next, let's set up the input fields for the name and the email. I'll add an input tag. We'll set the type to text. And we'll set up names for both of these as well. I'll just set the first one equal to name. We'll close that one up. And I'll copy that and use that to create the second one. I'll leave the type as text, and we'll change the name to email. Of course, our form's going to need a submit button as well, so I'm going to go and add that at the bottom. Remember, that was an input tag, but we just changed the type to submit. And instead of using a name, we'll use a value field to set the text in the button. I'll just use send again. Now, if we look at the next questions in the survey that we want answered, we're going to want to use some kind of form element that allows my user to choose from multiple answers. And there are several multiple choice type of elements that we can use. For the first one, we want them to tell us if they're male or female. And basically with this question, we only want one answer. So what we'll use is a radio button. Radio buttons also use the input tag. So we'll start off by setting up an input tag for both of these answers. I'll add an input right after male, and this time the type will be radio. A radio button is specifically designed so my user will only be able to choose one answer. Like normal, we need a name for our element, and I'll set that one to gender. And this type of input also needs a value to tell it what the answer is going to be. So for this one, I'll just use M for male. Now let me set up a self-closer, and we'll create our second input. I'll copy the first one, and we'll paste it after female. And we'll be leaving the type as radio, and we'll also be leaving the name as gender. Remember, we've got two answers, but one question. And the name is what groups these two together so that we know they're both answering the same question. What'll be different is the value. And in this case, I'll just use an F to represent female. Now let's save our changes and see how that looks. I'll go back to my page. We'll refresh it. And we can see the text fields that we added for name and email. And those work just like they did before. We also have our send button down here at the bottom. And you can see the radio buttons that were added to the male and female answer. I can click either one of these, and you'll notice if I try to click the other one, it deselects the first. So the way this radio button group works, my user will only be able to choose one or the other answer while they're filling out the form. We could actually have several sets of radio buttons included in one form, and they would be differentiated by using a different name for each question. Now down below we have a similar type of a question, but what's different for this question is instead of just one answer, we want our user to be able to select whatever answer applies to them. So we're going to need a different device than a radio button, and what we're going to use here is a checkbox. We set them up the same way, but checkboxes differ because your user can select as many of them as they want. So we'll go back to our document, and we'll go into the second section, and we'll add a few more input tags. I'll add one for car. And this time we'll set the type equal to checkbox. Again, we need a name, and it should match the question. So I'll call this one own. And of course, we need a value. And this answer is car, so I'll add that in here. For these types of input devices, your programmer may want you to use special values. For instance, car might be 1, mansion 2, and yacht 3. So you just use whatever value you need to in order for the program to work. I'll add a close tag on this first one, and then I'll copy it so we can quickly make our other two. We'll add one after mansion, and I'll just change the value to mansion. We'll leave the name and the type the same, and then we'll add one after yacht. And of course, I'm going to change the value there as well. Now you can see, just like the radio button, the name is what groups these three elements together as the same question, and the value is what differentiates each answer. So let's save this and we'll try it out. We can see now we have 3 checkboxes, each at the end of my elements. I can click and check on each one, and you notice I could check them all or just a couple of them if needed.